Back to Reuben Snake, your humble serpent. Chapter 5 is a little rugged, but we'll get through it and we'll talk about it briefly afterwards. Or chapter 6, I'm sorry. From prejudice and unemployment to alcohol abuse. I was stationed in Berlin one year. I came back in February of 1958, and I was discharged from the Army at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. That ended my military service. I was encouraged to re-enlist, but I chose not to. I wanted to do something else with my life. I had ideas of going to college and acquiring a college degree. When I got out of the service, I went to live with my mother and brother in Waterloo, Iowa. My brother was working in a factory that produced farm machinery. It was extremely difficult for me to find employment in that town. I used to go out every day looking for a job, but I just couldn't get hired, even though I had served in the military for over 3 years and had an honorable discharge. In addition, I had all this electronics training from Haskell Institute, from the Army. That's when I first began to experience the effects of racism and prejudice. I would go to a plant where they were hiring, and I'd put in my application. And I'd look around and I'd see the white guys that were applying for the job. The next time I came back to apply again, those white guys would be working there. They would tell me, well, we can't use you right now. Come back next week. When I come back again next week, the white guys that were applying for the job at the same time, I would already be working. That's when I began to get a little bit disenchanted with the system that we were living under. After a few months of job hunting, I told my mother, I'm going back to the reservation to stay with Grandma and see if I can get a job in that part of the country. So I came down here to Nebraska to the reservation in the spring of 1958 and stayed with my grandmother. It was a situation where my oldest brother, my brother cousin, and Carl, and 2 of his brothers were all staying in this little 2-room house with my grandmother and 1 girl cousin. She was a grandma, slept in the back room, and we men all slept on the floor in the front room. None of us could find any work. The only work available was day work for the local farmers. They used to have what they called the unemployment log. There was a great big log down by one of the buildings here in Winnebago. Everybody would get up in the morning and go and sit on that log and wait for a local farmer to come by who was interested in hiring somebody for the day. That's the only way we used to get work, because I had not lived on the reservation for a number of years. I wasn't well accepted by the local white community, especially the local town marshal, a white man. Even when I was sober, he used to throw me in jail. It became a habit for him to pick me up every weekend, whether I was drinking or not. He would just throw me in jail and keep me overnight and then say, well, get out of here and don't bother me anymore. But I wasn't bothering him in the first place. That went on throughout the whole summer of 1958. I must have been wound up a little in that community jail house about 10 times. And it was just because he didn't like me. There was no other reason. I wasn't breaking the law. Finally, one day in August, I told him, Ben, I've been thinking about it. I came to the conclusion that you really don't like me, so I'm going to get the hell out of town. And he replied, you know, that's just what I've been waiting for you to say. So then I said, well, I said it, so I'm leaving. That was the kind of experience I had that summer. That I got out of the service. That was when I began to get more angry with the system. I couldn't get a decent job. When I came back to the reservation, was set up by local law enforcement for no other reason than I wasn't considered a local boy. I was being thrown in jail whether I was drunk or sober. They always tried to convict me of buying alcohol for minors, but they never could prove it. But that was the only excuse they had for throwing me in jail. Oh, we heard you were buying drinks for these kids, but I never did. It was just their way of bothering and agitating me. In addition to sitting on that log waiting for the farmers, we used to go to Sioux City and put in applications at the different plants and factories up there. But I never did get hired. The same sort of discrimination was affecting a lot of guys. So I told my cousin brother, who had just graduated from high school, I'm going to Milwaukee. There's a school there that I want to attend, an electronics technical institute. If I can get the money together, I'm going to school there, and maybe after I graduate, somebody will hire me. Members of the local Reformed church here in Winnebago had been encouraging my cousin brother to go to a small Reformed church college in Sioux City, Iowa. So he replied, "Why don't you just forget about Milwaukee and go to school with me?" he said. "Let me think about it." A week later, I told him, "Yes, I'll go with you." So we filled out the application papers for the junior college and we were accepted. I was flat broke, and so was he when we started college. We had 65 cents between the two of us. That was all. I had signed up for my GI Bill, but the check wasn't due to arrive for 60 days. So we were trying to survive on a college campus in the small town for 30 to 60 days on 65 cents. Fortunately, we were both ex-football players, and this small college gave us each a football scholarship to play on its team, so that the scholarship enabled us to get into the dormitory and get into the dining hall without any fees being charged. The college was Northwestern Junior College in Orange City, Iowa. It was another tremendous cultural adjustment because Sioux County, Iowa is populated predominantly with Dutch immigrants. They're all Reformed Dutch church people with very strict standards. Here I was, an ex-GI, coming from the city of Berlin, where I used to wild night, and I was used to a wild nightlife, and I ended up stuck in this little town where they considered it a sin to have your laundry hanging out on Sunday morning. When I started taking courses at this junior college, I was 21, which was a couple of years older than a couple of my classmates. There were a few other ex-GIs there, maybe 4 or 5. My cousin brother and I were the only Native Americans in the school. In fact, we were probably one of 4 or 5 minority people. All the rest were white kids. They had a student body of about 250. They had one guy from India, one guy from Yugoslavia, and then I think there was one black student there. Other than them, my cousin brother and I were the only different people. In fact, the students got confused when we had our social get-together the first week we were there. All the white kids came up to me and asked, "What part of India are you from?" No, I said. "I'm not that kind of Indian. I'm the one from the Winnebago reservation." As usual, the other students were ignorant about Indians. They were all operating on stereotypical images. Many of them were friendly, but once again, there was a certain effort to keep us at arm's length. I was never invited to their homes, and I became a real problem for them because I wouldn't go to church on Sunday. My cousin brother used to get up and go to church, but I wouldn't. I'd stay in bed. Pretty soon, the word got around. Reuben Snake is a non-believer. So there was a concerted effort to save my soul. I was taking education courses with the hope of becoming a teacher. I also became a pretty good preacher. I took some Bible study courses. I studied the life of Christ and the Acts of the Apostles. I could deliver a pretty good sermon, but I never went to church. I was more proficient in the Bible than a lot of kids who went to church every Sunday. The faculty, as well as the students, were putting pressure on me to attend church. We had one English professor who had been a missionary in India for 20 years. He was a good teacher. He formed a writing club just to test my skills. I wrote a short story that impressed him. He took me aside and said, "You're studying to be a teacher, right? Well, we've got enough teachers in the world, but we don't have enough writers. Why don't you switch your major to English and I'll help you learn how to write?" So I began to adjust my courses to get more involved with writing. During the year I was there, he gave me a lot of valuable information about how to write. He was the only teacher there that showed concern about my well-being. But after a year, I decided that the lifestyle was just too conservative for me, and I thought, I don't want to come back to this institution. I'm going to leave and find something else to do. He was the only one who really tried to say something worthwhile to me. I was still considered a persona non grata on the Winnebago reservation by that white town marshal, so I couldn't go back and stay with my grandmother. Instead, I went back to southern Minnesota. That was a bad move. I went back there and started drinking. Nobody pushed me into that kind of life. It was just that many of my peers, people that I'd grown up with, were into alcohol. The best way I could get along with them was just to drink with them. We would stay drunk for 3 or 4 days at a time. Eventually, that led to me getting into trouble with the law. When I got thrown in jail, I talked to the sheriff and told him I want to get out and go to work. He made arrangements for me to get hired by a local foundry there in Albert Lea. I used to get out of jail early in the morning and go to work all day long, and then I'd come back to jail at night. That went on for about 60 days until my sentence was over and I got out. I stayed on at the foundry and it was a good paying job. I managed to get in a lot of overtime and pull a pretty good paycheck. I would share my earnings with my uncle, with my brother and his family, and some of the younger relatives who were in school. I'd buy them school clothes and things of that sort. I'd get drunk on Friday night and maybe get drunk on Saturday, and I'd sober up Sunday and I'd go to work Monday morning. It was okay. It wasn't a difficult time for me, but I just wasn't happy working in this foundry. I felt that I was capable of better things. One day, one of the Menominee brothers came to our town and said, "I'm on my way to Arizona. I have a good job down there. I work for a crop dusting organization. If you go down there with me, you can work with me." "Well, let's go to Arizona then," I replied. So we left Minnesota and went to the Winnebago reservation to visit my mother. Then we went to Kansas, where we stopped at the Potawatomi reservation. We got stuck there. We didn't have any money and we couldn't find jobs. We were staying with my grandpa, actually my mother's brother, who lived out in the country in order to make a contribution to his household. We used to go out hunting every day. We'd hunt deer and grouse and pheasant. That's how we spent a good part of the winter in 1959 and 1960. My brother and I cut a lot of firewood for the old people. We'd organize wood cutting crews and we'd go out to the woods to cut firewood for the old people, and then we'd go hunting at night. We'd sit at home with the old man. He and another old Potawatomi man were the two principal singers for the Potawatomi people. When they got together, they would bring out the sacred drum that they use in the drum society and the traditional religion of the Potawatomis. They would sing all the songs that go with that. Then the next night they would get together and tie up a water drum so they would sing peyote songs, Native American church songs. We enjoyed listening to those old men singing. My grandpa uses to like his beer. He was an excellent snooker player. Every Friday night he'd say, "Come on, boys, let's go downtown." Then we'd go to Mayetta and a little town on the reservation. The local white farmers would be waiting for him. They'd all be lined up because none of them could ever beat him. They were always trying. They'd get into a snooker game and he'd run the table on them. And then they'd set them up and they'd say, "We'll buy you and your grandson some beer." He never did lose a game. We'd wind up with a table full of drinks. I used to appreciate Grandpa's skill at playing pool. So that's the routine we enjoyed throughout December, January, and February. We stayed with him there at the Potawatomi Reservation until spring thaw in March, and then we set off for Arizona. When we left our reservation, we hitchhiked to Kansas City, Missouri, where we underwent another ordeal. We lived on Skid Row, renting a little two-room apartment for $11 a week. You can probably imagine what it looked like. We used to go to slave markets, as they were called. We would sign up early in the morning and they would find temporary employment for the day. That's how we survived. We go to a car wash or to a furniture store to load furniture, or to any number of places where they needed daily labor. We'd work maybe 8 to 10 hours and earn just enough to pay our $11 a week for rent and buy ourselves something to eat and drink. We drank virtually every day after putting in a hard day's work. We got so absorbed in drinking that we quit working. So then they kicked us out of the flop house where we were staying. After that, we used to sleep in abandoned tenement buildings with rats. We'd go into these vacant buildings and there'd be a lot of old furniture in there, and we'd pile up old mattresses, and we'd lie down on a couple of mattresses and cover up with one to keep warm. Then we'd listen to the rats scurrying around all night long. We were just real Skid Row bums. We lived like that for about 2 months. We would go out to various gospel missions in Kansas City to get something to eat. We'd sit there and listen to the sermon for an hour or two, and they'd give us day-old bread and a bowl of soup. After that, we'd make our way out to find a place to sleep during the night. That was our routine. To obtain money to keep drinking, we would hit the streets and find the winos who knew how to panhandle. We did a little bit of that panhandling ourselves. I don't regret that experience. I don't think I'd be a person that I am today if I had not been through that trouble. Being a bum on Skid Row is not the most desirable life, but the suffering taught me something about life that I still carry with me. One day in the fall of 1959, I was walking down the street in Kansas City next to a kind of big embankment. There was a concrete wall and a big high mound of earth. I was walking along when I heard this voice proclaim, "Stop, you black son of a bitch." I didn't think that voice was addressed to me, so I kept walking. But I heard it again. "I said, stop, you black son of a bitch, or I'll blow you apart." So then I looked around and realized I was the only individual on the street. That voice must have been talking to me. I stopped and I looked around and I looked up that hillside, and there was a uniformed policeman standing there with a shotgun aimed at me. And then he demanded, "Get over against the wall there." I walked over to the wall and put my hands on the wall, and he came down the hillside, jumped down, and called in on his walkie-talkie. Right away, a squad car pulled up. 2 more cops jumped out. They shook me down and put handcuffs on me. They said they were hauling me off to jail. They asked me, "What did you do with your gun? Where did you put that stuff?" And I told them, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any gun. I don't have anything." About that time, another police car pulled up and a man got out. He must have been the owner of the store down the street that had been robbed. The policeman asked him, "Is this the damn nigger?" This is a true story. That you're looking for? The one that you saw, he looked right at me and he said, "No, that's not him. He's not black. He's Mexican or something. The guy we're looking for is black." After I told them I wasn't the man they wanted, the cops took the handcuffs off me and warned me, "Get your damn ass off the street and don't give us any trouble." That's just one of the experiences that I had while I was living that Skid Row street life. My brother and I experienced a lot of unpleasant things that I can recall. Another incident which had a tremendous impact on me. In the early winter of 1959, we were in Kansas City at a place that provided sleeping places for homeless men. They offered something to eat and had a recreation room. We were sitting in a recreation room along with about 100 other guys. They were involved in various activities, putting jigsaw puzzles together, playing cards, playing table tennis, and things of that sort. My brother and I were sitting there just talking when we noticed these guys playing cards. A black man and a white man, they began to argue with one another over something regarding the game. Violence erupted almost immediately. They started fighting and the black man knocked the white man down. Then the white man jumped up. He had a knife in his hand and he swung and he sliced the black man's stomach open and all the blood began to pour out. Everybody there saw it. Our immediate reaction was to clear out quickly because the cops would soon be arriving and we didn't want to be there when they came. It was almost like rats running off a sinking ship. Everybody hit the doorways as fast as they could and scattered toward 4 directions. My brother and I were running right along with them. Sure enough, as we ran down the street and through the alleys, we could hear the sirens of the police cars coming. That incident that left a strong impression on me. It reminded me that by living this street life, we lived close to death. Even though it was probably a low point in my life, I still don't regret the experience. It helped me begin to appreciate what homeless people go through. My brother eventually got a land lease check from his reservation, so we were stepping in high cotton then. We went down to one of the local clothing stores and got ourselves some new clothes. Then we went to a hotel room and showered and shaved, and after we had cleaned ourselves up, put on our new clothes, and he told me, "Now that we're looking good, we better get the hell out of town." We were still thinking about going to Arizona, but then he said, "Let's call Sis up and see what's going on." So we went down to the payphone and he called my sister in Cleveland, Ohio. She and her family had gone to Cleveland on a government relocation program. When we told her we were trying to get to Arizona, she declared, "You guys shouldn't go to Arizona. Come over here to Cleveland. There's a lot of work over here. You can surely find a decent job over here." So we accepted my sister's suggestion. My brother had enough money to buy us bus tickets to Cleveland. It just so happened that we arrived during the biggest snowstorm Cleveland had experienced in 100 years. There was something like 24 inches of snow in a 24-hour period. It was in 1960. My sister had a big apartment. She and her husband and little children made room for us. Then we began the process of looking for a job. It was enough that our sister was feeding us, giving us a place to sleep. We didn't want to bother her for bus money, so we used to walk. We'd get up in the morning, paper, and write down information about a couple of places that we're hiring. Then we'd walk to those places. Sometimes it was a long way. We were looking for regular industrial jobs. Eventually, we found work way on the west side of Cleveland. where they were making melamine plastic dinnerware. Next, we had to learn the bus routes and how to get from East Cleveland to West Cleveland on street buses. We used to ride the bus across town to go to work every morning and come back in the evening. We were still dedicated to drinking. We were still basically party animals. We had a cousin who lived in a Polish-American neighborhood called the Flats. One day I told my sister, after work we're going down to the Flats to visit Bibi. After work we stopped at a tavern and we picked up a couple of 6-packs of beer. Then we went over to my cousin's house. She was happy to see us. Her husband was happy to see us. We sat down and started talking. At that point, a young lady came in. It appeared to me that she was really hurting. My cousin introduced me saying, "This is Kathy McKee. She lives upstairs." I shook hands with her. After a while, we started playing canasta, and I was visiting with Kathy. Although we were both from Winnebago Reservation, I had never met her before. I had met her brother when we were kids, but I had never met her. Kathy had been raised by her uncle and aunt, and they were genuinely traditional Winnebago people. And Kathy was a real homebody. They rarely took her anyplace. She had been married at the age of 18 and moved to Cleveland. Her husband was an alcoholic. During one of his drunken rages, he had beaten her up badly, so she had separated from him. That's why she was spending time with my cousin. So I got to visiting with her, and we started laughing. I really appreciated her personality. When I met Kathy, she had been living in Cleveland less than a year. Later on that summer, Kathy went home. My brother and I remained in Cleveland, but then my sister got seriously ill, so my mother came after her and brought her back to the reservation. The doctors had decided that they were going to have to take out one of her kidneys because she might be developing cancer. There she was, back in Winnebago with all her children. And there were 3 men, my brother, my brother-in-law, and I were in Cleveland. The moment my brother-in-law found out that my sister was sick and wasn't coming back, he started drinking. He soon lost his job. That left my brother and me to pay all the bills. It wasn't long before my brother got into drinking and he stopped contributing. Pretty soon, I was the only one going to work and trying to pay the rent and buy food. After a couple of weeks of that, I told them, "Hell, why am I doing this? You guys are drinking and enjoying yourselves. I might as well get in there with you." So I quit working and started drinking. That went on for a couple of weeks until the landlady kicked us out. I ended up on the streets of Cleveland, sleeping under railroad trusses. In the meantime, my sister was back in Winnebago, undergoing an operation, and my mother was taking care of her children. We were on Skid Row in Cleveland. We were sleeping in abandoned tenement buildings. One night, my brother and I were lying down by the railroad tracks. We were covered up with newspapers trying to keep out the chill, when he sort of stretched his feet out and took off his shoe. The whole top of his sock was gone and his toes were sticking out. Talk about stinky feet, I said. "Man, get downwind from me. I can't stand that smell." There he was, wiggling his toes and declaring, "Boy, I haven't seen you characters for a while." He hadn't had his shoes off for weeks. He had been too busy drinking day in and day out. It was exactly at that moment that I decided to sober up. The next morning, when we woke up, I told him, "Brother, right here and now, I'm going to quit drinking and sober up. I've had enough of this. You can keep on drinking if that's what you want. I'll just stay by you. But I'm not going to drink anymore. Then, whenever you decide to sober up, we'll get out of town. We will go someplace else, all right?" He replied, He continued drinking every day for about another week. I tried to look after him. About a week later, after he'd been drinking quite heavily throughout the day, he said, "Well, I'm going to sleep it off for a while." So I told him, "I'm going to be sitting here in the park. I'll, I'll come along later, sometime after the sun goes down." He told me which building he would be sleeping in. I watched him walk down the street. Then I was sitting in the park in the center of Cleveland. He must have been gone for about an hour. I was just sitting there observing people down on the street. I saw my brother coming back. He wasn't staggering. He was walking real straight, and he was walking real quickly. So I got up and started walking towards him. When we met, I asked him, "What's happening?" He replied, "Boy, that's it for me. I'm going to sober up and we're going to get out of this town." I asked him what happened. He said, "I went into the building over there and I had made myself a place to lie down. Right after I lay down, some guy came in. He wasn't aware that I was there, but he came in, and then shortly afterwards, two other guys came in behind him and they began to argue. The two guys attacked the first individual and they began to beat him with an iron pipe. After they beat him unconscious, they left. I waited a little to make sure they were gone, and then I got up and I went over to look at him. He was dead. He wasn't breathing. That sobered me up instantly. I think we'd better get out of town." This incident, which occurred in the early summer of 1960, and the murder we witnessed in Kansas City illustrate the kind of life that we were living on the streets. We were going to leave town by ourselves, but then my brother-in-law said, "I'll go along with you guys. I don't have any reasons to stay in Cleveland. My wife and kids are back on the reservation. I've had enough of this town." So we went down to the railroad yard, hopped on a freight train, and headed west. We rode the freight train all night long until we entered Chicago Railroad Yard. Then we switched trains and got on another freight train north to Wisconsin, where we rode the freight train into Madison and got off there. We went into Madison train station and tried to clean up as well as we could. Then we went out onto the highway where we started hitchhiking towards Wisconsin Dells, about 50 miles north of Madison. There was a large Winnebago community there where we had relatives. After arriving at Wisconsin Dells, we went to my aunt's home. We must have looked pitiful because she just started to cry when she saw me. "Oh, my poor nephew, how come you're looking so sorrowful?" I admitted to my aunt that we had been having some trouble, and she made us shower up and then got some of her son's and husband's clothing and said, "You men can change clothes." We put on those clean clothes, and then she cooked up a big meal for us. She told us, "You can stay here as long as you like," but because she already had a large family, we didn't want to bother her, so we just stayed overnight. The next day we walked into town and started trying to find some way of earning some money. We remained in that area for probably a week or so, and then when we heard that there were some jobs opening up down along Wisconsin-Illinois border at one of the canning companies, we decided to hitchhike down to Janesville to see if we could get a job. When we arrived in Janesville, we got hired at the Libby McNeil Canning Company as soon as we began working for them. I told my brother, "I'm going to work at this job until I earn enough money to buy a car. Then we must get to Arizona." He agreed. "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea," I declared. "During that period of time we were working here, I don't care what you do, but I'm not going to drink. I'm going to save my money." And that's exactly what I did. I worked some long hours in the canning factory. I averaged about 80 hours a week. After several weeks, I had saved enough to go out to buy myself a little car. I found a real nice little car and I bought it, and I told my brother, "I'm going to work another week or maybe 2 weeks and earn enough money so we can hit the road." But he was drinking yet again. "Yeah, okay," he said. I worked a couple more weeks and saved $300 or so. Then I announced, "Let's get out of here." We packed up our stuff, jumped in the car, and took off. I stated, I want to go up and say hello to my dad and goodbye, and then we'll take off to Arizona. He agreed. We went over the Black River Falls Indian Mission to see my dad. While we were there, we ran into one of my other cousins. It was his birthday. He and I had been at Fort Bragg together. He was in the 82nd Airborne Division when I was in the Green Berets. So he said, "Hey brother, it's my birthday. You must have a drink with me." I hadn't been drinking for a couple of months, so I refused. "You go ahead and have one." No, you ain't my bro if you don't drink with me." So I gave in. "Well, I'll have one with you." I never should have said that. One round led to another one. Before I knew it, I was off on a big drunk. By the time I sobered up, we had just had enough money to get to Nebraska. So I told my brother, "Let's leave this place. We'll go to Nebraska, we'll find a job to earn enough money to get to Arizona." He agreed, and so we left Wisconsin and drove down to the reservation. We went to my mother's house. My mother was happy to see us again. She hadn't seen us for over a year. About the second evening I was there, I asked her, "Hey Mom, I met a girl out in Cleveland. Her name's Kathy McKee. Does she live around here?" My mom answered me by saying, "She lives right across the road. That little white house over there is where she's at." That evening I walked down across the road and knocked on her door. Kathy's sister came to the door. I asked if Kathy was home, and she said yes. So Kathy came, and I started talking with her. That was the end of my solitary years. That was the end of Hill number 1. That's a hard chapter to take. Hard stories, real stories. And you see a lot of that going on now in major cities and in small towns here across the United States with fentanyl and with alcohol still. It's rugged to be marginalized so that it's so hard to find a job. And that's what I see too with immigration enforcement picking on Native American people, as well as immigrants from down south, from Mexico, from Central America, from South America, from all the Americas. And one thing that this man understood, and he went to Mexico, and we're going to get to that chapter later, and made relations with peyote people down there, and celebrated the similarities, and celebrated that at one time we were all united. And so it's my feeling that since we're all united, at least spiritually, at least as acknowledging one another as human beings, that this is part of the indigenous paradigm that will, I hope, be taught and inherently be picked up by the dominant culture. That we're all related. And these trials, tribulations that you see, that Ruben talked about, that you see with people bent over on fentanyl, people hovering in doorways, not having a place to sleep, this homelessness, this abuse of substance, all of that is in relation to colonialism and tyranny. Again, within an indigenous paradigm, there is a solution. Everyone should have a warm place to sleep. Everyone should have a full belly. Everyone should have the right to contribute in a good way to the community. That's actually a something that everyone wants in some way or another. It doesn't mean everybody wants a 40-hour work week, and I don't think We're done with that. In our conscious mind, with the abuse that's going on, this is what it leads to. Well, yeah, it leads to great stories, but it leads to the trials and tribulation that Reuben outlined in racism, marginalization, and that in and of itself is an attack on someone's prosperity of finance. And so I'll leave you with that. And on chapter 7, we get into much heavier things about marriage and family. So with that, I hope you enjoy chapter 6, and we'll pick up the sticks for chapter 7 on the next recording. Enjoy.